The pepper. That is the detail I keep coming back to. Not the competition itself, not the judges, not the moment I lifted the lid of my pot and understood, before a single word was spoken, that something was wrong with what I was smelling. It is the pepper I keep returning to, because she had been the one to help me blend it. 3 days before the competition, she had sat in my kitchen on the stool she always used, the one near the window, and she had watched me measure, and she had said, "Let me help you." And I had handed her the tatashe and the atarodo without a second thought, because that is what you do when someone has been your person for 14 years. You hand them things without thinking. You do not imagine, when they are standing in your kitchen touching your ingredients, that they are already thinking about what else they can touch. My name is Zina, and this is the story of how I nearly lost everything to the person who had watched me build it. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome. This is where stories are told with the full weight they deserve. Stories about what friendship actually costs and what it sometimes takes from you before you understand what it was really worth. Please take one moment to like this video right now, drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. I read every comment, every single one. Now let me take you back to where this story begins. Not at the competition. Long before that. At the beginning of a friendship that should have taught me earlier what it finally taught me at the end. My full name is Zina Obi. Zina to everyone who knows me well enough to shorten it. I am 31 years old, the second of 4 children, born in Nnewi, to a father who repaired generators and a mother who sold provisions from the front of our house and made the most extraordinary onobu soup in our entire street. I grew up understanding that food was not simply what you ate. It was what you offered when language ran out. It was how my mother told us she loved us on the days when everything was tight and she was tired and the words were somewhere she could not reach. She would cook. She would make something from very little and she would place it on the table. And the act of placing it there was the sentence she was trying to say. I learned to cook the way I learned to breathe, without deciding to, without being taught formally, simply by being present in a kitchen where someone who loved me was doing it. I moved to Abuja at 25 with a bag, a box of spices my mother had packed herself with the specific care of a woman sending part of herself ahead of you, and an idea that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I was 19, a catering business. Not a large one, not yet. Just my hands and my pots and the knowledge that when people ate my food, they did not simply eat. They paused. They looked at the plate differently. They said things like, "What did you put in this?" And "I want this at my daughter's introduction." And "Can you make this for my mother's birthday?" And "I have been thinking about that stew for 3 days." I built slowly and on purpose. Private orders first, then word of mouth, then a small Instagram page that grew faster than I expected. Because food, when it is made with genuine attention, photographs like honesty. You cannot fake it. By 28, I had a name in Abuja that meant something. Not everywhere, but in the circles that mattered for the kind of work I was doing, Zina's Kitchen was a recommendation people made with the confidence of someone vouching for something they had experienced personally. And through all of it, from the first order to the 100th, from the days the power went and the days a client paid late and I had to juggle figures that did not want to cooperate, through all of it, my best friend Adanna was there. Or I believed she was. I had known Adanna Chike since we were 17. We met in a tutorial center in Nnewi the summer before JAMB, seated beside each other by alphabetical arrangement, and we had bonded over the shared discovery that our mathematics teacher explained differentiation in a way that made both of us feel personally targeted. We became friends the way you become friends at 17, fast and total, and without the caution that experience eventually teaches. Within 2 weeks, we were finishing each other's sentences. Within a month, we were calling each other's mothers auntie without being asked. She was beautiful in the kind of way that rooms noticed. She was funny with the sharp, precise humor of someone who observes people closely and says the thing everyone is thinking but hasn't organized yet. She was warm when she chose to be, which was often enough that you remembered it as constant. What I did not see at 17, what I would spend 14 years slowly learning, was that Adanna's warmth had a pattern. It peaked when she needed something and cooled when she had received it. It rose when you were struggling and thinned when you were succeeding. It was not that she wished me ill exactly, it was something more complicated than that, something I would not have the precise language for until much later. She could not be happy for me without feeling something about herself. My success always arrived in her heart carrying a mirror she did not like to look into. I did not understand this at 25 when I was building my business, and she was between jobs in Lagos, and she would call me for long, warm phone calls and tell me she believed in me, and I would hang up feeling loved and supported and grateful. I began to understand it around year 9 of our friendship, when the business had grown enough that people outside our circle were talking about it. When I was invited to cater a senator's daughter's engagement dinner, and the photographs went on the host's page and accumulated comments, and Adanna shared it on her story without tagging me. And when I mentioned it, she said, "Oh, I thought you wouldn't want the extra attention," and then changed the subject so smoothly, I almost didn't notice. Almost. I kept noticing things after that, small things. The way she would ask about my business with questions that felt like probing instead of curiosity. The way she went slightly quiet in rooms where people praised me and then came alive again when the subject changed. The way she once told someone I was her business partner at a social event when she had never once contributed anything to my business except occasional unsolicited opinions about my pricing being too low. But 14 years is 14 years. There's a particular gravity to long friendship. It pulls you back even when you have walked far enough to see clearly. You tell yourself she is complicated. You tell yourself nobody is perfect. You tell yourself that the history between you is a living thing and it deserves protection. You keep choosing the friendship because the friendship is what you know, and what you know is sometimes more powerful than what is true. The competition notice came on a Tuesday morning. The Abuja Culinary Excellence Awards, an annual showcase for independent food businesses and chefs under 35. 4 rounds, a panel of industry judges, a cash prize, a professional kitchen equipment grant, and the thing that made me read the announcement 4 times to make sure I was understanding correctly, a 6-month mentorship placement with a culinary institute in Lyon, France, fully sponsored, full access to one of the finest food training programs on the continent. I called my mother before I called anyone else. She said in Igbo, "You are going to win this. Not apply, not try, win." I said, "Mama, I haven't even submitted the form yet." She said, "Submit it first, then we will talk about the rest." I submitted it that afternoon. 3 weeks later, I received the confirmation. I had been selected as one of 16 finalists. I called Adanna. Her voice when she heard the news lifted exactly in the way I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. High and warm and full. "Zina, this is it. This is the one. I am so proud of you." I felt the relief of it. The particular relief of wanting to share good news with someone specific and having them receive it the way you hoped. I should have sat with the relief long enough to examine it. The fact that I had been holding my breath before she picked up. The fact that I needed to calibrate her reaction before I could fully feel my own joy. The fact that sharing good news with your best friend should not require bracing. Instead, I said, "You should apply too. The applications are still open." She was quiet for just a moment. Then, "You really think I should?" I said, "Adanna, you can cook. You know you can. Apply. Let the best person win. If it is you, I will celebrate you. If it is me, I know you will do the same." I meant every word.
She applied. She was selected. The joke started within the first week. Light at first, easy to file under the category of banter between old friends, the kind of teasing that passes for affection between people who have known each other long enough to have a shorthand for everything. "Zina, When I am in Lyon eating croissants and learning from 3-star chefs, what will you be doing? I would laugh and say, learning from better chefs than the ones you will meet. She would laugh back. But the jokes did not stay light. They shifted gradually, the way the weather shifts in Harmattan, so slowly that you keep dressing for what the morning felt like, and then you step outside and realize the afternoon has become something different entirely. One evening, we were cooking together in my kitchen, both practicing dishes we were considering for the competition, and my ofe onugbu had come out with the exact depth of flavor that my mother's always had, the kind that makes the bitter leaf taste purposeful rather than aggressive. And Adanna tasted it and set her spoon down and looked at the pot for a moment. Then she said, "You know, on the competition day, something always goes wrong. Even the best cooks have off days. Maybe your stock will be watery. Maybe your oil will smell." I looked at her. She smiled and lifted her hands. "I am just saying, these things happen. Pressure does things to people." I stirred the pot and said nothing. But my mother's voice came back to me from somewhere. A thing she used to say when I was small and learning to read people. She would say, "Zenachuku, when someone tells you who they are from inside a joke, do not laugh, listen." I had laughed that evening. I kept laughing for 3 more weeks. The competition was held on a Saturday at the Transcorp Hilton Ballroom, a large, bright, professional space transformed for the occasion into something that felt genuinely significant. Lights, camera equipment, judging tables arranged in a wide arc facing 14 competitor stations, each one labeled, each one prepared the previous evening during a setup session that every competitor attended. I had arranged my station the night before with the deliberateness of someone who understands that preparation is its own form of prayer. My groundnut oil and palm oil in small, clearly labeled glass bottles. My spices in small containers arranged in the precise order I would reach for them. My stock in a sealed flask. My bitter leaf already washed and wrung and stored in a covered bowl. I touched each container before I left, the way my mother used to touch the door frame of our house before a journey, lightly, with intention. I went home. I slept 5 hours. I woke before my alarm, made tea, and sat with the quiet of 5 in the morning the way I always did before something important. I talked to my mother. She had been dead for 7 months, a brief, aggressive illness that the doctors had not seen coming and that had moved faster than any of us were ready for. She died in October, and I had buried her in Nnewi in the rain and had returned to Abuja in November. And I had gone back to cooking because cooking was where she still lived. I said, "Mama, today is the day you prayed for. I am going to cook without hurrying. I am going to let the bitter leaf release properly before I add anything else. I am not going to watch anyone else's station. I am just going to be inside the food the way you always were, present, paying attention, talking to it." I put on the apron she had given me 2 years before she died. Orange with brown trim, soft from washing. I folded it into my bag. I left for the venue. I did not know that 2 hours earlier, at 4:10 in the morning, Adanna had entered the competition hall through a side entrance she had noted during setup the previous evening. She had gone directly to my station. She had stood there for a moment, composed and deliberate, and then she had begun. The palm oil. She replaced it with a bottle she had prepared at home, a mixture of palm oil and a small quantity of kerosene. Enough to corrupt the finish of anything cooked in it, enough to leave a smell that would only become apparent under cooking heat when it was too late. The salt, she emptied the container and refilled it with a mixture of baking soda and a powdered detergent, ground fine enough to approximate the texture. The color was close enough. If you did not taste it before you used it, you would not know. She rearranged everything back exactly as it had been. She was in and out in under 15 minutes. What she had not accounted for, because people who plan these things only consider the variables they can control, was Baba Emeka. Baba Emeka was the night security guard for the venue. He was 63 years old, a Benue man who had held this post for 11 years, who walked his rounds with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who had stopped trying to impress anyone and was simply doing his job. He had been at the far end of the corridor during Adanna's arrival. He had seen someone enter through the side entrance at 4 in the morning, and he had not recognized the person as staff. He had followed at a distance. He had stood in the corridor outside the prep hall, and he had watched through the partially opened door. He had not gone in. He had waited until the person left. Then he had gone to the head of venue operations, a woman named Mrs. Ujo Okafor, who happened to be sleeping in her office because the event was early and she lived in Lugbe. And he had woken her up and told her what he had seen. Mrs. Okafor had reviewed the security footage. She had made a decision. She had not said anything to any competitor. Not yet. She wanted to see what the morning would bring first. I arrived at 7:20. Baba Emeka was at the entrance doing what he always did, moving slowly and noticing everything. I walked past him and said good morning and asked if he had eaten, and he looked at me with an expression I registered but did not yet have the context to understand. He said, "Come here, my daughter." He walked me a few steps to the side of the entrance. He lowered his voice. He told me everything. I stood in the entrance corridor of the Transcorp Hilton ballroom at 7:20 in the morning, and I heard every word this old man said to me. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. When he finished, I thanked him, specifically and fully, because what he had done for me deserved to be received with full attention. Then I walked to my station. I checked the palm oil first. I uncapped the bottle and held it to my nose. The kerosene was faint, but it was there. My nose grew up in kitchens. It knew what did not belong. I wet my finger and touched the salt. The flat chemical taste of detergent reached the back of my throat before I even fully registered the flavor. I stood at my station for a moment with the competition hall filling around me, lights brightening, judges taking their seats, other competitors setting up and chatting, the whole large ordinary machinery of a public event moving forward. Adanna arrived at 7:45. She walked across the hall with her equipment bag and her head high, and when she spotted me, she raised her hand and waved with the easy open warmth of someone who has slept well and feels good about the day. She walked over. She put her arms around me. She said, "Today is our day, Zina. One of us is going to Lyon. Let the best chef win." I hugged her back. I said, "Let the best chef win." I held her for 1 extra second, the specific deliberateness of someone making a note of a thing. Then I went to find Mrs. Okafor. I explained quietly and without drama that my provisions had been tampered with and requested replacements. I did not name Adanna in that conversation. I did not need to. Mrs. Okafor's expression told me she was already in possession of more information than I had given her. She replaced my provisions without question and without spectacle. I returned to my station and I began to cook. I cooked the way my mother taught me, without watching anyone else, without hurrying the oil to temperature, without rushing the bitter leaf or pressuring the stock to do more than it was ready to do. I cooked with the particular quality of attention that cooking demands when you understand that the food can tell the difference between presence and performance. My ofe onugbu was the kind that builds. It is not a soup that announces itself immediately. It arrives quietly, and then it deepens on the tongue, and then you realize you have been holding the spoon in the same position for 30 seconds because you are not ready to put it down. My jollof was the right kind of wrong, slightly smoky from letting the bottom catch without burning, the specific controlled patience that produces the crust that everyone argues about and everyone secretly knows is the whole point. My fried plantain was the color of late afternoon. Across the hall, Adanna cooked too. She cooked well. That was the thing I had always known and never allowed myself to diminish. She had genuine talent, real instinct,
Food that expressed something true about who she was when she was not afraid of who I was. She never needed to do what she did. That was the part that would take me the longest to process. 2 hours and 40 minutes after the competition began, the dishes were submitted and the judging panel began its work. And then the screen above the judging table came to life. Not with scores, not with sponsor announcement, with security footage. Grainy, time-stamped, clear, 4:17 a.m. My station. A figure moving through labeled containers with practiced, deliberate hands. Adanna's face in the pale light of the empty competition hall, calm and methodical and completely certain of what she was doing. And audio, her voice, low and efficient, speaking to herself as she worked. The palm oil, mix it properly so she won't smell it until she's cooking. The salt, replace everything. She never tastes before she serves. She thinks it shows confidence. Today, it will show her something else. The hall went silent in the specific way that large spaces go silent when something undeniable has entered the room and there's nowhere for it to go except into every person present. I watched the screen. I had known since 7:20. I had known what was done and who had done it. But watching it play in a room full of people, watching the hall process it alongside me, I felt the weight of it arrive in a place that information alone had not reached. 14 years. 14 years of birthday calls and long phone conversations and showing up and letting things go and handing her the tatashe without thinking, because that is what you do with someone you trust. I looked at Adanna. She was looking at the screen. Then she looked at me. And what was on her face was not the performance I had watched all morning. It was something underneath all of that, smaller and more honest, something that might have been the beginning of understanding what she had done and who she had done it to. She walked across the hall. The cameras followed her. She stopped in front of me. She said, "Zina, I am sorry." Her voice was not steady. It was the voice of someone whose construction has fallen and who has nothing left to stand behind. She said, "I have been afraid of you since secondary school. Do you know that? Since we were 17. You have always been the better cook. You have always been the one people remembered. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was happy for you. But every time something good happened to you, I felt it like something was being taken from me. And I know that is not how it works, but I could not stop feeling it, and I panicked. I panicked and I did something I cannot undo." She was crying, the genuine kind, the kind that does not perform. The head judge, a woman named Chef Adeze Metu, who had spent 25 years in professional kitchens on 3 continents and who had the steady, unhurried authority of someone who has seen everything, spoke clearly across the silence. She looked at me. She said, "What would you like us to do?" The cameras were on. Every person in the room was watching a woman in an orange apron with brown trim decide something in public that most people only have to decide in private. I looked at Adanna for one long moment. Then I looked at Chef Metu. I said, "Taste the food. Just taste the food. Let the dishes say what they say." They tasted the food. Chef Metu tasted my ofe onobu twice. She returned to it. She tasted the jollof and then she closed her eyes for a moment in the way that people close their eyes when they want to be alone with a flavor. Adanna was disqualified. The competition rules which she had signed were unambiguous on the matter of sabotage. I won. Not because she was removed, because when they ate my food, it was the food that deserved to win. Chef Metu said on camera, "This woman cooks like someone who has been given something precious and refuses to put it down carelessly." She did not know she was describing my mother's apron. She was describing something much larger than that. After the scores were announced and the hall had reorganized itself and the cameras had found other things to point at, I walked to where Adanna was standing alone near the side wall. She looked like someone from whom the air had gone out. I stood in front of her. I said, I am going to say this once, clearly, because you deserve the truth from my mouth and not from a screen. She looked at me. I said, I have known you since we were 17. I have been present for 14 years of your life, including the parts that were hard and the parts where you are not your best self. And I stayed because I believed long friendship was worth long patience. When your mother was in the hospital, I left a client's event to sit with you. When you lost that job in Suleja, I lent you money that you paid back a year later without interest. I was there for all of it. I paused. I said, you replaced my salt with detergent. You put kerosene in my oil. You walked into the hall this morning and you hugged me and you smiled and you said, let the best chef win. She looked at the floor. I said, I am going to forgive you. I want you to know that. My mother raised me to understand that bitterness is something you cook for someone else and then eat alone in the dark, and I refuse to eat that meal. When I am ready, and I am not ready today, I will let this go completely. I picked up my bag. I said, but Adanna, I am done. Not from anger, not from bitterness, simply from the clear knowledge that a friendship in which your success always makes the other person want to take something from you is not a friendship. It is a performance of one. And I have been the only one performing sincerely for a very long time. I said it without raising my voice. That was the truest part of it. There was no venom in what I said. There was simply the particular clarity that comes when you have finally seen something completely and you are ready to name it out loud. I turned. I walked back toward the judging table where Chef Metu was waiting to hand me an envelope and shake my hand. I did not look back. Baba Emeka was in the entrance corridor when I came out. I walked up to him and I stood in front of him and I said, how do I thank you for what you did? He looked at me the way older men sometimes look at younger women when they see something in them they recognize. He said, you thanked me already when you greeted me this morning and asked if I had eaten. I have worked here 11 years. Not everyone who walks through that door sees me when they do. I held that for a moment. Then I said, did you eat? He laughed. I went back inside and found the catering table and brought him a plate. Lyon in February is a city that takes food as seriously as Nnewi takes family. There's a reverence in the way people there discuss a meal, a care in the preparation of even ordinary things that reminded me, in a language I did not speak and a country I had never visited, of my mother. The Culinary Institute was the kind of place that makes you feel the smallness of what you know and the largeness of what is possible at the same time. 12 stations, equipment I had only seen in YouTube videos, a spice library with drawers that went for the length of an entire wall. My main mentor was Chef Marianne Dubois, a Lyonese woman in her 50s with silver hair and the calm precision of someone who has spent 40 years turning attention into art. She watched me cook on my third day, and when I finished, she tasted the dish, set down the fork, and said in accented English, you cook like you are in conversation with someone who is not in the room. I said, my mother. She nodded as though this was the correct answer and the only one she had been expecting. On my 5th day, I met Sayesa Adeyemi Walsh, 29, Nigerian Irish, raised in Cork, trained in Dublin, placed in Lyon through a parallel program. She wore her hair in a large natural puff and approached food with the meticulous curiosity of a scientist who had somehow become a poet. She sat beside me in a lecture on classical French techniques and leaned over and whispered, "Your egusi from the welcome dinner on day 1. I have been thinking about it for 4 days. What did you do to it?" I said, "I cooked it with full attention and no shortcuts." She said, "I think you might be the most honest cook in this building." I said, "Sit at my station after this lecture and I will teach you something about patience." She came. We cooked, we talked, we discovered that we had both been raised by women who understood that food was language, and this shared inheritance gave us more common ground than any curriculum. She became the kind of friend I had spent 14 years thinking I already had, the kind who celebrated your win without needing to diminish herself in the process, the kind who told you the truth with enough care that the truth could actually be received, the kind for whom your success was not a mirror that frightened her, but a window she looked through with genuine delight. I called my brother Obiora from my Lyon apartment on a Sunday evening. The city outside was doing that particular European winter thing where the light goes golden for 20 minutes before 5 and then disappears completely. He said, Mama would have been telling the whole of Nnewi. I said she would have started with the neighbors and worked outward. We stayed on the call for a long time without saying much, the comfortable silence of people who have lost the same person and learned to carry it together. When I hung up, I sat by the window and watched the last of the golden light leave the rooftops. I thought about bitterness and about forgiveness and about the difference between the two. I thought about what it costs to stay in a place that has been making you smaller for a long time and what it costs to leave and why the second cost feels higher even when it isn't. I thought about a 63-year-old security guard who saw something wrong and did something about it because he was a man who paid attention and had decided at some point in 11 years of walking the same rounds in the same building that what he noticed mattered. I thought about my mother's apron folded on the chair behind me. Then I stood up and went to the kitchen. I put the apron on over my sweater because a kitchen is a kitchen.
And Lyon in February is cold, and the apron is warm, and it smells, still faintly, of crayfish and palm oil and something that does not have a name, but that I recognize as love. I began to cook. Before we go, I want to leave you with 3 things to sit with, because this community does not simply watch and move on. We think, we discuss, we carry the questions with us. First, when Zina sent Adanna the competition link and said, "Apply, let the best person win," she meant it completely. She loved without strategy. She gave without calculating the return. And that love was used against her. Does that mean she was wrong to love that way? Or does it mean she was simply loving the wrong person? Second, the moment Baba Emeka decided to act, he was not required to. He could have filed a report in the morning. He could have told himself it was not his business. He chose to find the person affected and tell her directly because he believed she deserved to know. Who in your life has been a Baba Emeka? And have you told them what that meant to you? Third, and this is the one I want you to carry the longest. Adanna had real talent. The story says this clearly. She could have stood on her own. She was more than enough. But she could not see that because Zina's gift felt like a diminishment of her own, even though it was not. Have you ever been afraid of someone you love because their ability made you feel smaller? And what did you do with that fear? Drop your answers in the comments below. This is a space for honest conversation, and I read everything. If this story found you today, share it with someone who is still trying to understand why the person they love the most keeps making them feel slightly less than enough every time they leave the room. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell because the next story is already waiting, and I think you will not be able to stop watching once it starts. I will see you there.